Unafraid Show daily live. And this is the place where we bring you the top sports news explained quickly and simply and without bias. So you guys can go talk about it around the water cooler and everything else. Make sure that you like, subscribe, tell a friend about the show, and of course, share it. Today we got a couple of things. Number one, Stephen A. Smith. He got into it with Monica McNutt, but this is actually bigger than that. There's actually a bigger fight going on with him and Pat Mcafee over there at ESPN. And Pat obviously had the issue yesterday with calling Caitlin Clark a white bee on live television. So that was already a thing. And we got to talk about ESPN's College Football Power Index that came out in college football, obviously. And it gives the percentage chance of who's going to win the national championship and all of this. And there is a statement about how the committee is going to vote these top 12 teams. And I'm going to tell you, the ACC ain't going to like it. The Big 12 ain't going to like it. And we'll pay attention to all of that. And also, the MLB has suspended 4 players and one of them has been banned for life. And we got to talk about the issue of gambling when it comes to sports because we're seeing more and more players get suspended over these years. Okay. So here we go, right? So we have a lot of things. First thing, so this Stephen A. Smith situation. So he got into it with Monica McNutt yesterday on First Take, and she kind of called him out, and he didn't like it. And it was clear, you could see on Molly's face, on his face, he didn't like that she said that essentially that he talks about the WNBA so much now. He's doing so much for women's sports as the executive producer of First Take, all of these things. However, she said, well, you could have been talking about this long before now. And he's 100. Well, she was 100% right. And Stephen A took offense to that and really tried to take credit for all the things that women, all the women he had on the show, for all their careers, everybody from Carrie Champion, Jamil Hill, and all of this. And then you had the Pat Mcafee and what was going on with Pat Mcafee, where he called Caitlin Clark a white bee, referring to her as the cash cow of the WNBA. And this is what we were talking about yesterday briefly, is that Caitlin Clark has become such a polarizing topic and really her feud with other people that has, ignited some of the worst takes out in sports. Now, let's equate this to a movie, right? And Angel Reese said yesterday, which turned into a viral moment, that she's part of the reason that the WNBA is getting so much attention in women's college basketball. And it's true because Caitlin Clark has been painted as the hero in this story, even though she doesn't need, think about it, heroes in stories, Superman, Batman, whatever your superhero story is. They don't need somebody to protect them. They are the actual, superhero in the story. But the superhero needs a villain. And Angel Reese has been the villain so far in this story. So, as much as people would have paid attention to what Caitlin Clark was doing, they would have paid less attention if it weren't for Angel Reese and the "you can't see me in the ring me" thing. So, she is as much responsible for the growth of Caitlin Clark and what has gone on as much as Caitlin Clark's style of play has generated interest in her. So now this translates over to Stephen A. Smith and Pat Mcafee because they are fighting over there at ESPN. Because Pat Mcafee, Saturdays are for the boys, that whole bro mentality. Well, he is no longer allowed on Stephen A's First Take, where he's the executive producer, because Stephen A has taken over the show as the main character on the show since Skip Bayless bailed over to Fox. So now it's Stephen A's gig. And I think that Stephen A is looking at this like he is the end all be all of sports takes and for the sparking of a lot of careers. Now, there is some truth to this. But this what happened yesterday and the polarizing moments are literally about gaining control over there at ESPN, because Stephen A doesn't, because he's put in the long hard work at ESPN, got fired from ESPN essentially, then came back to be an even bigger star than he was the first time. And he is actually the WNBA, the thing that is growing. He was able to find a, hit a spark and then blew that up into what it is now. And he does not like the fast ascension of Pat McAfee or the way that Pat McAfee handles his business. So they're fighting behind the scenes at ESPN. So it looks initially like all of this is about Caitlin Clark and everything that went on with Monica McNutt and everything else. But this is really a bigger fight behind the scenes. And Stephen A, who's not letting Pat McAfee on his show, but I would be willing to bet that Pat McAfee would have Stephen A on his show, because that's just kind of how Pat is. Like, hey, yo, like, come on, let's go. Let's wrestle for ratings. But I want to see how Stephen A Smith is going to handle this situation with Monica McNutt, because if he barred Pat McAfee for coming on for some things that he didn't like, and he clearly took offense, and he said it on his podcast, took offense to what Monica McNutt said, now is he going to bar Monica McNutt or shut the window down on her on First Take? Because he literally said on his podcast, had you heard of her prior to First Take? And people who have been following the WNBA, where she was big at, because she was a big star at Georgetown, then you would have known who Monica McNutt was, even though First Take is a huge platform. But it kind of feels disingenuous when Stephen A's taking credit for people's careers like, Jamil Hill, who was on, I think she was on Cold Pizza prior to him even being over there, and Carrie Champion. And yes, the platform of First Take is big. And yes, he has given people opportunities, but to then kind of try to take credit for people's careers, not really, a good deal. And the whole who talks about women's sports more than First Take, I mean, that's kind of a general thing right now. Everybody's talking about women's sports, particularly women's basketball. Now, so we're going to see how all of this plays out. But I want to point out, though, that this Angel Reese versus Caitlin Clark situation, we're going to talk about this in a short tomorrow. The WNBA needs to maximize this rivalry and turn it into a rivalry, but not in a mean-spirited way. They need to do this like Bird versus Magic, like the whole Converse commercial and then the McDonald's commercial, off the backboard, off the ceiling, off the scoreboard, nothing but net. They need to market it in that way. And yes, it's going to rub the Diana Taurasi's, the Nneka Ogwumike's, and the, Aja Wilson's the wrong way, because those are some of the best players in the league. However, though, you need to capitalize on this. And even if it rubs people the wrong way, use you got to use the Caitlin Clark phenomenon as a commercial for everything else that you're doing. So if the other women who are the better women in the league right now, if they go on and put on shows every night while everybody is trying to watch Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, now you really got something, because then you can hook fans in to what you're doing. All right, next thing up. ESPN dropped their college football power index. And this became a thing because it looks very similar to my top 12 teams that I said were going to make the college football playoff in 2012. And that video is available on YouTube, just easy to look up. And when you looked at what they did, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a preview of how the college football playoff committee is going to vote. Let me give you a prime example. So here is what it looks like. So you have obviously Georgia 1 on down to SMU at 25. Here's the part I want you to pay attention to on this little graph here. Is you have Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Missouri, LSU, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Auburn, Florida, all in the top 25 of the Football Power Index. That's 11 out of the 16 teams in the SEC. So when it comes time to pick the 12 teams, obviously 4 are going to be taken up by the Power 5, the Power 4 champions, plus a non-Power 5. So that leaves 7 at-large bids. And when the computers already are in love with the SEC in here, so you got 11 SEC teams, and then Big Ten teams, you got Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, USC, and that's the end of the story. So you got 5 there. So when it comes time for the computers to spit out their, analytical information for the committee to devise, and despite the SEC only playing 8 conference games, how do you think that this is going to work out? You think that this is going to be an even distribution? Absolutely not. You are going to have there be. So I gave you the 5. And of the 7 teams left, you're going to have, if it's a big name, you might be able to get Florida State and Clemson in. So if that works out, so the ACC can get 2 teams in. But I want you to look at how many Big 12 teams are in there. You got Kansas. They're not going to make the college football playoff. You got Kansas State. And you got Arizona. That's what you got. So how is this supposed to work? Because there's no Utah. So the Big 12 is looking like a 1-team bid. And then that puts you at 5 teams left. 5 teams left. So now you're going to have probably 3 more SEC teams, which is going to put you at 4. And then you're going to have 2 more Big 10 teams. So now that leaves you with 4 SEC teams, 3 Big 10 teams, 2 ACC, 1 Big 12, and you're looking at the non-Power 5 group of 5 teams as well. This is the way the college football playoff is going to be broken up. And if you don't get that second ACC team, now you're looking at, or that second Big 12 team, now you're looking at 4 SEC, 4 Big 10, and this is where the Big 10 is going to push back on the college football playoff committee and everything else. This is where they're going to push back because the SEC is only playing 9 conference games. And you cannot in any way, shape, form, or fashion look at the SEC and look at the Big 10 and be like, oh, yes, one is significantly better than the other. No, both of these conferences are comparable. So now the SEC gauntlet is no longer just the gauntlet that people wanted to tell you that it was. This SEC gauntlet is actually in reality a exactly what is going on in the Big 10 because Ohio State is playing Oregon. You got Michigan playing Ohio State. And in the SEC with only 8 conference games, you're not going to have as many of those games, which also gives the free wins. And I've tried to explain this many, many times, which is when you only play 8 conference games and you don't play, and the majority of your teams aren't playing 10 Power 5 games, you have put yourself in a position to have less losses than the other conferences. And when there are big time matchups in the Big 10, Big 12, ACC, and the SEC's playing those November cupcakes, now they get artificially pushed up the rankings, which manipulates the college football playoff. And in this case, it used to be the top 4, but now it is the top 12. So, because how can you look at these schedules and say that one team is so much better than that their schedule is so much better than the other when their non-conference is not looking exactly, when they have 3 essentially free wins in the non-conference, while the Big 10 teams are going to be playing an absolute gauntlet. So, and then that took us to what was the percentage chance of teams to make the college football playoff. So you have Georgia, number one, 80% damn near. Oregon at 76%, which is probably the highest that they've ever been in the history of the program. Texas up there, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Penn State, Alabama. This looks like the typical cast of characters, except for you are going to end up with, the mandatory buy-ins, because you have two ACC teams in here in Florida State and Clemson, a ton of SEC teams, and then you got a few Big Ten teams and Notre Dame. So this is going to be very, very interesting, and something that I want you guys to point out and pay attention to. All right, next thing up, the MLB has suspended 4 players. They have suspended, A's right-handed pitcher Michael Kelly for a year, Padres left-handed pitcher Jake Groom for a year, Phillies infielder Jose Rodriguez for a year, and Diamondbacks pitcher Andrew Saalfrank for a year. But they gave a lifetime ban to Marcano, who plays for the Padres. This dude bet $150,000 on baseball, and the total amount that he bet on the MLB was $87,319. Now, the average amount per bet that he bet was $378. Number of MLB bets, 231. 25 Pirates games bet on, and he only won 4.3% of his bets. So number one, he sucks at betting. But number two, we're seeing more and more players suspended in every single sport for gambling. We just saw NBA Michael Porter Jr.'s brother get banned for life from the NBA. We've had in the NFL, there were more Detroit Lions suspended for gambling in 2023 than the NFL suspended for gambling in its first 98 years of existence. But here's the question. With the invention of, all of these betting sites and everybody that can bet, the access of availability, people are thinking that it is the access that is allowing people to bet more. It has lowered the barrier for entry, yes. However, people who are betting on the sports that they're playing in, they would have already been betting on the sports that they're playing in, because that's what they do. Most people are sensible enough to be like, yeah, bro, even if I do want to bet, I'm not taking these chances. And what we're seeing is the advancement in the technology of DraftKings, FanDuel, who are actually reporting the players because they want to keep because it's in their best interest to report them, because they do not want any manipulation of their lines, of their bets, and everything else, which affects their bottom line. So I do not believe that there is a direct correlation between between these betting sites and players being suspended. What I do believe, in terms of the amount of gambling that was going on, I believe that if these sites were not available, these players would still be betting through bookies instead of on the sites. That's the difference. We just have the technology to be able to catch the players now who are doing it. That's the difference. And so these leagues are going to have to take a big, hard look at, the types of bets that are allowed, where the manipulation of the prop bets goes on of players. Because, yes, it's easy to catch Michael Porter Jr.'s brother, but how hard is it going to be if Michael Porter Jr. had a gambling addiction and people are wagering $5,000, $10,000 on his bets a night? See, that's the difference. That's the hard part. It's easy to catch the outliers, but when you're, hiding in plain sight, that's where the issue is going to be. And somebody had to be the guinea pig in this, just like with the banned substances. Players are going to be suspended, and the league is going to have to act harshly initially, because there's no way There's no other way around it. And they better hope that a smoking gun never comes out about Shohei Ohtani, that he was anything more than just an ignorant party in that multi-million-dollar gambling scheme. So sports are going to have to watch this because this is a reoccurring problem and the technology is in place to catch them. But you guys, that's Unafraid Show Daily for the day. Make sure that you guys share it, tell a friend, because we'll be here on the daily to break sports down to you simply.